Words are valuable in and of themselves. Each word carries a story, an entire history of thoughts. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today we are turning our attention to a great little piece of nonfiction, but that is still very literary and language relevant, and that is the Wordhord, Daily Life in Old English by Hana Videen. Apparently, Videen started collecting or hoarding Old English words and investigating them and learning more about them and the culture from which they were birthed on Twitter at OE Wordhord, and Horde is Hord. And then skip ahead and Princeton University Press puts this out. I think it was actually first put out by Profile Books in the UK, but this edition is from Princeton University Press. It is divided into chapters that represent categories of words. So working, eating, traveling. And it takes a horde or a grouping of Old English words and then sort of investigates them and traces them out and connects them in such a way to where you find yourself thoroughly engaged and having a good time. This is clearly written by someone who is infectiously passionate about their field and who has turned over seemingly every stone to scrutinize the life squirming underneath that the rest of us, people like me, would continue to be totally ignorant of without someone like Hana Videen. It came to me that what Lydia Davis does in her essays for translation, here Videen does for words, language, especially Old English. But not just Old English, because the things that she brings up, the different topics, materials, thoughts around the Old English language and Old English words are relevant to all language and culture. It came to me early on to refer to Videen as a logophile, or what I thought meant a lover of words. But then towards the very end of the book, I was amused when I read, even though logophile, first used in English in the 1950s, is defined as a lover of words, the term more accurately describes a lover of thoughts. And she uses the very first line of the Gospel of John from the Old English translation and then pits it against Greek and Hebrew to lend even more depth to the relationship between words and thoughts or meaning. She says early on that this book is not like a language primer, so much as an old photo album. Old English words are familiar, but also strange, like seeing pictures of your parents as children. There's something recognizable in their smiles. I think that's such a great metaphor. Understanding a language is not just about knowing words and grammar. Each language tells you something about the people who speak it, their culture, dreams, and daily life, how they see the world and their place in it. My interest in history comes first from an obsession with words, and this book's approach to the past is thus guided by words, not historical events or individual people. She will mention major events in terms of the English language, such as the Norman invasion of the 11th century and the Great Vowel Shift and Shakespeare. But she doesn't dig in, like she says, to biographies and histories. She stays very much focused on words and language. And like she said, what they tell us about the people of the time that Old English was active. This book is a word hoard of sorts, a hoard of words collected, treasured, and shared. It was inspired by hoard joy, the joy that comes from hoarding. As I gathered words like gems, I realized that they weren't just funny, strange, and beautiful, but that together they told a story about people's lives more than a millennium ago. And so that's what sort of takes it beyond just being a book that's one list of words and what we probably think they mean from looking at them and then being corrected by an expert like Videen on what they really mean, to something that's enjoyable for even the the common reader who doesn't know anything about Old English and may not be interested in something like this is how she is able to weave together a story out of mere words. That sounds funny because all stories are woven out of words, but I think you see what I'm saying. And as part of that, this book is a treasure trove of word-induced, word-catalyzed, word-oriented, word-stemmed trivia. It reminds me a lot of the days that I used to listen to or read stuff from Grammar Girl, Mignon Fogarty. Videen's style, tone, her voice, her cleverness, all work together to just pull you in the way that Grammar Girl did for me, where you're just hanging on every word and you're constantly amused, fascinated, intrigued. She's got a great sense of humor and sense of the connectedness of things. Saturn, the Roman god of agriculture, was associated with abundance, wealth, renewal, liberation, and time. During Saturnalia, the Roman festival held annually in Saturn's honor, all work and business came to a halt. It seems appropriate that Saturn's day is still associated by many with freedom from work. Another thing she does that's just really fun and playful and entertaining is she will have these great summary statements where she ties together everything that she sort of just walked you through, such as whether you prefer milk, coo worm, or cow warm, I don't know if I'm pronouncing these things right, or fridge cold, you can skink it into a cinch thinking of a time when wealth was measured in cows. And that may sound like utter gibberish to you, and I'm sure my mispronunciations don't help, but all that to say that when you've actually read the chapter, the material leading up to that, you can't help but smile when you read a lot of these statements. She is a stunning and gifted word detective and writes of her investigations with this nimble prose that sort of keeps you going at a really fast clip. Yet all the while sort of talking about things that should seem so over our head or very convoluted, especially when she's pitting together these quirky mysteries with words. And what I mean by that is she'll offer words that on the face value seem to mean one thing, but mean something totally different. But then she'll pit that against something else that then sort of defies the logic that she's just set forward. And so then finally, she'll take the two and trace out their etymological journeys. And at the end, you feel the way that you feel when you come to the end of a Sherlock Holmes tale. The penalty for gouging out someone's eye in 7th century Kent, for instance, was 50 shillings, the same as the penalty for killing a free man. So sight, it seems, was as precious as life itself. It's no surprise, then, that another word for the eye is heaphodium, head gem, or jewel of the head. Eyes in Old English have apples. An apple, pronounced the same in Old English as in modern English, was an apple or fruit, but it could also just be something round. The apel something ayin, apple of the eye, refers to the pupil. Perhaps people once thought that the round pupil was a solid sphere within the eye. The pupil does look like a round apple. And I remember reading something about this, I think in Robert Alter's commentary on his translation, with his translation of the Hebrew Bible, and in Proverbs where it talks about the apple of the eye. And I guess I had heard this expression so much growing up that I knew it just meant someone that's very precious to you, like she's the apple of his eye. And I just thought that, when he looked at her, your daughter is the apple of your eye. When you look at her, she looks like this precious fruit or something. I don't know I don't know that I really thought anything about it. I just sort of took it at face value. But then when it was revealed that the root is pupil, that apple has been translated from pupil and that there's a connection here, then you look at the pupil, especially when you're looking at someone's pupil from the side and you can see its roundness jutting out. And then it occurred to me that if something is to become the apple of your eye, and that means that it's very precious and dear to you, what better figuration than thinking, if I'm obsessed with something, if I'm enamored of something, then it's in a sense ever before me. It's something I'm always thinking about, something I'm always seeing. What better relation or figuration than the pupil, the very thing that's kind of stuck right in the front of our field of vision. But then Videen goes on and she says that today the expression apple of your eye refers to someone you love and cherish over all others. The phrase appears in Psalm 16, preserve me, Lord, and protect me as one protects the apples of his eyes. And she says that applum on his eum, eum is the Old English translation of Latin pupillum oculi, pupils of his eyes. And then listen to this, the Hebrew version, of which the Latin is a translation, so now we're going all the way back, says Eoshon ayin, meaning dark part of the eye. Although one theory suggests that Eoshon is a diminutive of Ish, or man, making the phrase little man of the eye. Is this because you can see your reflection, a little person in a friend's pupil? Apple or little man, it's an old idiom indeed. This is what I mean by she's just constantly questioning things. That detective in her is constantly poking at things and going back and leaving no stone unturned. But then she'll bring in this crazy trivia. I've never heard that about the theory of one translation of the Hebrew meaning the little man of the eye. And then she'll come up with her own question to throw it in there to stir your thoughts, such as, is this because we can see ourselves as a little man or a little person in the reflection of someone's pupil? She combs through all the texts, all the extant texts that we have that represent Old English. And at the very beginning of the book, she sort of aligns us properly with what Old English actually is. Because as she accurately, with me anyway, maintains, Old English is something that you think you know until you realize you don't. And she even opens the whole book with a meditation on the phrase, ye olde English, to show us that it's not what Shakespeare wrote. It's not even what Chaucer wrote, which was Middle English, but it's all the way back to Beowulf. And Beowulf, just like the Old English translation of the Bible, are two major texts that we have. But she also uses law books and homilies and prayers and sermons, poems, and medical texts from what are called leech books to give us a rich repository of contexts for her investigations of Old English. I highly, highly recommend this book because, like she says towards the end, words are valuable in and of themselves. Each word carries a story, an entire history of thoughts. And if you want to see someone with an infectious passion show just how true that statement is, I recommend you start with The Wordhord by Hana Videen from Princeton University Press.